Welcome to Unlocking the Parenting Code. I'm Kathy, and this is the space where we dive into real-life parenting stories. Because let's face it, raising kids today can feel like trying to crack a complicated code. Together we'll explore the ups and downs, share insights, and swap tips that make this journey a little smoother. So grab a cup of coffee, relax, and let's unlock the parenting code together. Today, I'm quite excited to introduce Kristen Himm. Kristen is a former public school teacher who now advocates for radical unschooling. She runs an unschool-inspired space for homeschool families in Albuquerque, New Mexico, America, and supports parents through free support groups and paid one-on-one coaching. With over 12 years of parenting experience and 11 years in education prior to starting a family, Kristen is passionate about helping parents embrace freedom and connection in their families. Kristen's journey is a source of inspiration for families exploring alternative education methods and self-directed learning. Kristen, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kathy, thanks so much for having me.
Kristen, let's start with your personal parenting story and what challenges you faced and how you navigated the situation, what you learned. It's likely that someone listening to this episode will hear something in your story that helps them along the parenting road.
Yeah, so I think the challenge I chose to talk about today is about sibling interactions. And that has been a source of challenge, I guess is the right word, for quite a while now between my two kids. So my kids are 12 and 7. And I think my oldest has somewhat resented having a sibling for most of her life, which is probably fairly common. I guess I didn't think about that as a possibility when we were having a second child. But it's definitely been something that we've had to navigate kind of all along. There were times when they got along better, but lately there's a lot of disconnect between them, and it's hard for me as a mama to witness it and help them both navigate it from their different perspectives.
Is it two girls?
It is. So I have
Okay.
two daughters. Yeah, and let's see, what else can I say about it? I mean, my older one and I were in we do an ASL class together, and we were in an ASL class together the other day, and she said she hates her sister, and it was really like hard for me to hear. So I'm the youngest of three. So of three girls actually. So and my sisters and I think got along. We're great friends right now. And I think we got along pretty well growing up. I mean, there was some picking on, but there was still lots of love. I always knew that they loved me. And to see like the older one have such animosity towards her little sister is hard. So, but the best thing I can do is, I mean, my approach is really to help, like I said before, to help them both navigate it from their own perspectives, and especially with the little one, because she desperately wants her sister's friendship and attention and love. So to help her, but she does a lot of pushing, like trying to demand the attention. And so, and that of course just makes the problem worse for the older one, and she just wants to push back more. But I also have some confidence in that how I'm parenting my children with a lot of love and connection between me and them, that eventually it'll come through for both of them, and they'll figure it out. That's my hope and my what I feel confident in, but who knows.
Yeah, siblings are they're really interesting. I'm number 3 of 6, and the age range between the first and the sixth was like 12 years, I think. So the different relationships that each of us have with other siblings is like, it's just really interesting. And then when you start looking at birth orders and what that, what kind of challenges or benefits come from that, then you've got another component to add into it. There's a lot of things I want to talk to you about the schooling thing, but I would almost think, like, when I think back about like the sister just above me, she was the one that I had the most conflict with growing up. Yeah, and we would get a reprieve from each other, like all six of us. We'd get a reprieve when we would go to school. And even some of those times it was hard because we're very, like I'm from a very small town,
Mhm.
because it would be, it would be the family name. So if your little sister came to school and she was wearing stripes and polka dots in the same outfit, um, it would be a family effect. So, but we got a little bit of reprieve. And I don't know how it would be if homeschooling had been an option and we were with each other 24/7. Like I don't know how that would work. And I almost think because of like being in the classroom, it was like if there's enough children, then the energy that bounces off between all the different personalities, you can sometimes, really pull out the golden nuggets and things. I found it the most difficult when the numbers were really small. So when
Mm.
I hear from homeschooling families recently, especially like most of them have been like 4 kids or 5 kids or more. And I almost think that might be a little bit easier as far as sibling relationships than with two. Like I would
Mhm.
think it would be really challenging.
Yeah, I could see that perspective, and I hadn't really thought of it um, in that way. So I appreciate you bringing it up. We do, I said in your intro of me, you mentioned that I run an unschool inspired space, which I do, and my kids come to that with me. So they do have other kids that they interact with on a pretty regular basis. They've both made lots of friends through that space, as well as some other homeschool groups that we've been a part of and stuff like that. So they both definitely have their own sets of friends, which is fabulous. They do not spend nearly as much time with them as the typical public school age child spends with their classmates. So that is for sure true. Um, yeah, and then you said something else. Oh, about just maybe the bigger family too. Yeah. Oh, we're not having a bigger family,
Yeah.
but yeah, that is really interesting. But fortunately, my kids have both found some good friends. Yeah, like I said, through our unschool space and other places we've been. So they both maintain some great friendships, which is fabulous. I love that they both have that as well. And I think developing social relationships outside of school or is really important and outside of the family. I will say that my sister's 2 kids. So one of my sisters and I actually live in the same neighborhood,
Oh,
and
nice.
she was homeschooling and unschooling before I was. Her kids are a bit older than mine. She also has 2 kids, a girl and a boy, and they are closer in age. My kids are 5 years apart. Her kids are 2 years apart. Her kids are like best friends, absolute best friends. Um, and I've heard that from some other families that have, 2 kids. And I really think it comes down to I mean, I believe that we all are born with some innate personality traits. Of course, I think the whole nurture versus nature concept is very interesting, but I think there's always both play a part in how relationships play out. And I know other families where the 2 kids don't necessarily fight, but they're not besties. So we see all kinds of different sibling relationships and families for sure.
Well, and I think it does change over time. Like I can tell you from my perspective now, where my parents passed quite a long time ago, the relationship that I have with my siblings in some ways is even better than it was when we were all under the same roof. So I think any parent who has been blessed with children, um, when you've been able to give a child a sibling, that's the most beautiful gift that you can give. What happens, as a result of that, you don't always have, like you said, you don't always have control. Do you notice any changes as your eldest daughter is moving into adolescence? Like I would think that that would also be a contributing factor to I don't know if I'd say anxiety, but maybe attitude.
Yeah, there's definitely been some changes with her in the last year or so as she enters adolescence. That's a perfect way to put it. And yeah, she's just changed. She definitely played with her sister more when she was younger, and she's gotten to this point where younger kids just kind of annoy her. It's funny because I actually advocate for how amazing mixed age grouping is among children, and how I think that that's one of the many places that public schools get it wrong when they separate kids
Hmm.
by age. Uh, so it's like, oh, I think it's great when kids are mixed age, but it is also clear that while kids can interact very well in mixed age groups and across age spans, it is common that their closest friends are within a year or two of their age. So they definitely group up by age like that because they're experiencing a lot of the same things. Um, so yeah, and I hope that as I know, like I said, I know that as things go on, like you said, with time, things change. And
Hmm.
it's really about practicing my patience and um my confidence in my parenting style and the way I'm raising my kids.
Yeah. And then you just have to trust and surrender.
Yes. Yeah.
Before we get too far into this, I really want to, I mean, I did all the Googling and, and tried to understand things because truly, when I was growing up, homeschooling was only the only reference I have in my mind to actual homeschooling when I was growing up was if somebody had been sick and they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't come to school. And I know that it has changed completely. I'm more aware of parents often making a choice to homeschool for one of two reasons, either because they really disagree with the public system and don't want their children in the system. So it's to get away from the system. There seem to be other parents that just have such a strong belief that homeschooling is a better option. So they choose it, for kind of like a positive reason. But just like with all the different school systems, it seems like the range of alternative choices has really grown like in the last decade, maybe a little longer, but at least the last decade. So, like there's homeschooling, unschooling, deschooling. I don't know if there's more than that. Those are the three that maybe you can just help us understand a little better. Like what's homeschooling? Like what does that mean if someone is homeschooling? What does it mean when you're unschooling? And then what does it mean if you're radical? Oh, and see, so now I'm getting them confused. So take it
That's
away
okay.
and
I'm happy to
explain
talk
it.
about it. Yeah, so I'll even go a little bit broader if it's okay.
Sure.
I definitely agree that alternative education has been really kind of blowing up in the last, I might even say 20 years, although the last 10 and 5 are even more. It's almost like exponential growth. It's growing so much faster than just, a certain percentage every year. But before, so also growing up, I don't think I ever heard of anybody homeschooling when I was a kid. And we really had two options and I grew up in a pretty small town that was a tourist area in the summer. So our population was huge
Mhm.
in the summer, small in the winter. But we had the public school and we had the Catholic schools or the Christian, the parochial schools. So those were the options where I grew up. And then when I moved from the East Coast in the US to New Mexico, pretty much at the beginning of my teaching career, and charter schools were starting to get really big here. So more and more charter schools were being opened. So that's another form, in my opinion, of alternative ed where they were doing things differently than the public school. And and of course there's private schools as well that aren't necessarily religiously affiliated, and those have grown as well. Since the pandemic, so, I mean, just when, everything shut down and everybody was scrambling for what's going to work for their family, still has their own unique situation. But when we were in this state of emergency, it was like everyone had to really think about what they needed to do for their family and what would work. And so, yes, a lot of people dropped the whole virtual school. We were on virtual for a full year in our state. So a lot of people were like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to homeschool instead. a few, and then micro schools are another thing that have popped up in the last 5 to 10 years, I'd say. So people are forming little micro schools where they have small populations of 10 to 50 kids. And
Is that what they call a pod?
so a pod could potentially, yeah, pods have, I think different people have different definitions for a pod. But
It's
I did,
confusing.
it's very confusing. I ran a pod, what we called a pod school during the pandemic. Somebody hired me to watch her employees' kids do virtual school. So that was a
Mhm.
pod. And these kids didn't even all go to the same school. They all had like their own schools and their own school schedules. And I just kind of kept an eye on them, made sure they went to their online meetings and completed their offline work, and made sure they were taken care of while their parents were at work because they were essential employees.
So
So,
more almost like a tutoring role, like just monitoring.
yeah, yeah, I would say
Okay.
I was more of a tutor, although they were very kind and matched my teacher salary.
Mhm.
But yeah, so that's kind of my idea of pod schools. Then I've heard of hubs. There's a lot of things.
Okay.
So anyway, so you have public schools, you have charter schools, magnet schools, micro schools, lots of schools. Those are all still, oh, and now there's online schools. So in our state, there's 2 or 3 accredited online public schools that people can go to for free, but they're still not considered homeschoolers because they're still under the direction of this
Okay.
online school and they
Hmm.
still meet all of the requirements of these online schools. And then there's homeschooling. And so homeschooling in the US, the laws for homeschooling are different in every state. Um, some states have way more oversight where they ask families for their kids to do the state testing, or they have to turn in portfolios. Some have way less oversight where you just kind of register your child as a homeschooler. That's kind of like what it is where I am. They have requirements, but there's no one who checks to make sure we're doing the requirements, which is interesting. And there's even a few states where you don't even have to register. You just homeschool your kids and nobody knows about it or talks to you about it.
Okay. Can I
Um,
jump in with one quick question, just so
yeah,
I don't forget it? Like what my understanding of historically education was that it was mandated that everybody attend school. I don't know if it was up till middle school or like I'm not sure where the cutoff date, but it was illegal at one point to keep your child at home. So when there aren't the regulations that go with homeschooling as such, like people who didn't go through, the regular high school program, they could take I forget what it's called, the GED or an exam to prove that you would have the equivalent of a high school degree, diploma. So when you're homeschooled, is there some kind of regulation or, is it up to each individual parent and family as to like how do you know your kids are ready if they choose to go on to further education?
sure. So again, in the US, the rules for education are by state for all of education, and that includes homeschooling. And there is what's called compulsory education that kids are required to receive an education. And of course, if a parent chooses not to send their child to public school, they can send them to private school. Charter schools in New Mexico are considered public schools as well. But anyway, and then there's homeschooling, which is a legal option in every state. So, but like, and most states require the family to register their children as homeschoolers, which means they're still complying with compulsory education. They're
Mhm.
still saying, okay, we are educating our children, but we're doing it at home. And then, states all have their standards, something that we did a lot, that we paid attention to a lot when I did as a teacher. We all had these standards that we needed to make sure we taught for each grade level. And it told us what each child needs to know in each grade level. And in our state and in other states, families are still held to that standard. They're still expected to teach their children the same things that are being taught in public school. It's just that some states have more oversight about it than others. Some states, like I said, make the homeschooling family do the testing or turn in a portfolio or some way prove that their children are
Mhm.
learning. and some states don't. They just don't. Most likely, my guess is that they don't have the resources. They don't have the people to check
Yeah.
up on them,
Yeah.
and they don't allocate any funds to them. And that's another thing. In some states, homeschool families receive money to help them homeschool their kids. It's not a lot. It's usually between like, a few $100s, but they can spend it on learning materials or memberships to museums
Hmm.
or, cool stuff like that that will enhance learning. Most states don't do anything like that, even though schools, of course, receive lots of taxpayer money to educate them. So when we keep our kids at home, that money, who knows where it goes for those kids? I don't know.
Okay, so then how does it transfer into homeschooling,
And
unschooling,
yeah,
radical unschooling?
so there's lots of different types of homeschooling. So homeschooling is just the umbrella that you're educating your child away from an accredited institution, basically. And so there's some, like there's the school at home model that we call that, which basically looks like parents like purchase curriculum and they do
Mhm.
the workbooks and they have the lessons just like in school. It generally takes a lot less time than in school because a lot of school is behavior management and wrangling all the kids to get them to sit still and, get the lessons and stuff. So there's families that really do that. They do sort of the school at home method. And then there's just a huge range beyond that of what parents do. There's lots of online type programs that families can get their kids involved in that are still homeschooling because it's not like a full course accredited online school. So there's online resources. There's a great site called Teachers Pay Teachers that people
Mhm.
might just sort of piecemeal, their stuff together instead of purchasing like a boxed curriculum. They might just grab different things for different subjects. Um, some families do a lot of project-based learning where they cook together and they build things together and they, create together and they find that their children learn through that. So there's a lot of different curriculum and styles. And then you have the unschooling approach. I call it an approach. And that itself has a wide continuum or spectrum. There's people who call themselves almost unschoolers. There's people who call themselves radical unschoolers, and there's like everyone in between.
Oh.
So unschooling is the notion that if we give kids tons of freedom and autonomy, they will pursue the interests that light them up. They will pursue their passions and their interests. And through pursuing those passions and interests, all the other academic pieces will fall into place.
Mhm.
It's also kind of the rejection of those state standards that I talked about earlier. It's kind of like who decides that every kid needs to know these things at this specific age? And it's kind of like that feels like we're being put into a box.
Mhm.
And humans don't need to be put into boxes. Every human is unique and powerful and special. And there's this belief that what's taught in schools or through those standards just doesn't meet the needs of every person. And when we allow people to follow their own passions, amazing things can happen. So, and that in that spectrum of almost unschoolers to radical unschoolers, the almost folks still rely on curriculum and lessons a little bit, but they also like to give their kids a lot of autonomy and freedom. The radical unschool folks, they sort of take that freedom and autonomy of what to learn and how to learn and when to learn, and they apply it to sort of every aspect of life. So they're letting their kids choose the clothing they wear out of the house. And a lot of radical unschoolers do unlimited technology time so kids can spend as much time as they want on screens. They might not have a lot of rules around food and let kids eat almost anything they want or anything they want. Bedtimes are kind of out the window and kids can sleep when they want. So that's sort of the radical end where it's like we give our kids tons of autonomy.
So what's the difference between that and what was labeled a permissive parent?
So there is when people hear about it, they say, "Oh, so you just," and I saw somebody say this in a thread on Facebook once. They said something like, unschoolers just let their kids do whatever they want and hope for the best or something to that effect. It's definitely not unparenting. And that's what some people will say also is just lazy parenting or permissive parenting. The idea around unschooling is that we really focus on the connection with our kids. We focus on connection and partnership. There are definitely boundaries still held. So while I do consider myself a radical unschooling parent, I still hold boundaries with my kids around things, and we still talk about everything. I don't always love the choices they make, but I also give them the freedom to make their choices and learn from their own mistakes and their own experiences with those choices. But there's definitely not just, it's not all mayhem and anarchy, and they're just doing anything they want.
Well, I find that very interesting because, like, I always considered myself to be quite flexible and open, and I believe in children having lots of experiences, but I always thought that I needed to make sure as the parent about that they were set up for success. So as far as that they had, adequate sleep, that they had healthy nutrition, that their environment was such that they could be successful. And yeah, so this it's kind of a I can't even imagine how it would work. Like, is it from like when they would normally have started traditional school? Like, is it from 5, or do you give those wide options to a toddler, or like what's it really look like?
So it depends. Unschooling is different for every family. And there are some families that won't even bring sugar into their home. They won't even bring,
Mhm.
we do. In my opinion, we have a good mix of, sort of processed sugary foods and healthy, nutritious foods. And our kids actually choose fairly well from both. My younger one is much more into sugary things than my older one. But she still manages to choose nutritious foods every day, along with some of the sugary stuff that she eats. The question of when people start is different for everyone. A lot of people figure this out very early on that they want to use this approach. My sister, for instance, started when she found unschooling and radical unschooling when her kids were like toddlers, babies. Um, and I didn't start it until my kids were more like 9 and 3, or 9 and 4. So it's just different on when people start, but it's more about sort of your own beliefs, and lots of people practice many aspects of this. And it's interesting because you ask like if it's school age, and some people talk about how kids, especially kids who are able to have a stay-at-home parent in their early years, they really are largely self-directed in
Mhm.
those early years. A lot of parents let them play. We just want our kids to play. And then at some point, it's like, oh, well, they're 5, so they must stop playing and go sit at a desk. And that seems very silly, right? Um, and of course, parents are gonna, and a lot of things too, when your babies are new, you let them sleep when they're tired.
Mhm.
I mean, we don't necessarily put them on a strong schedule when they're really young, right? It's like, oh, they're tired, they go to sleep, they wake up, we play, and then they go to sleep some more. So when we try to fit our kids into a schedule, it's usually more for our own convenience than for what they actually, I mean, maybe they need it. And there's a lot of debate around a lot of these things. There's a lot of debate around sleep. Um, is, 10 hours of sleep that starts at 3 a.m. and goes till, what is that, 1 p.m., is that better or worse sleep than 10 hours of sleep that happens earlier in the day? So I think there's been science that has shown that either way you could believe the research. I'm not sure. So to me, my kids getting enough sleep is more important than when they sleep.
Yeah.
And like I said, they tend to choose a good mix of the nutritious versus not so nutritious foods.
Do you know the Reggio Emilia philosophy?
I've heard that philosophy a few times. I've heard that thrown out. I don't know a whole lot about it. My oldest actually went to a pre-K with a woman who used that approach, but I never learned that much about it. So, but I
Well,
know it's a lot about play.
it's very there are a lot of similarities to a lot of the things that you're talking about as far as just the philosophy goes, but it really is about every child is competent and capable at every stage that they go through. Um, it's very respectful as far as children being competent to make choices that are going to, have a positive impact on them. One of the things though that um, is kind of like a signature feature of that approach is the environment. There's a very strong emphasis on the power of the environment, and they speak of the environment as the third teacher, like parents, teacher, and the environment. And like when the way you're talking about it, it's kind of like between an environment that is geared to set them up for success based on their choices and their interests, then if you topple that in with kind of intentional parenting, where your communication is really strong and you have those conversations and then give them, I guess that's where I had the disconnect when you were first talking, because I can see it. If you have the conversation with your child, they're at a developmental stage, or you are speaking to them in a way that they understand, like really understand the meaning of what you're saying behind your own thoughts. But if you sit down and you explain, this is kind of what's behind having this choice of a sugary thing. This is what happens to your body when you have this. And then, you make the choice today and then if there is something afterwards, then you say, this is kind of what happens to your body when. So I could see if you had that kind of a relationship with your child where you were, before giving them this wide open choice of everything, that you make sure that you have given them, that you've created the environment that they understand what, those choices really are, and then they make them.
Absolutely, yes. The environment is definitely important. And I think thank you for sharing that information with me about Reggio Emilia, because it helps me understand it better. So there's another thing. So yeah, having the relationship is definitely part of the environment. And like I said, some families won't even bring the processed food into their house, and that's part of the environment too, right? They'd rather bake homemade cookies with their kids than bring in processed fruit snacks, or what, just for example. And so there's that value that they're creating in their environment and in their home. And then I will also add that in terms of the educational side of unschooling, there's this idea of what we call strewing, where we're presenting our children with different things that might interest them. So it's not just letting your kid kind of, stare at the wall all day or whatever. We're providing perhaps books or activities, or even experiences can be strewing too, going out to museums or any kind of place that might pique their learning, or something that they want to dig deeper into. My oldest was on a swim team for about a year and a half, and we suggested she get on a swim team because she loved swimming. She just loved being in the water all the time, and so she got on and she loved it. And she would start like researching. She would watch videos about stroke
Mhm.
formation and technique and stuff like that. And when her coach found out she was doing that, he was like, none of my students do that, or none of the kids on the team, I haven't heard of any of them doing that. But here she was, it was like, this was her interest, this was something she was into, so she got really into it and really dug in and learned as much as she could. And then after about a year and a half, it kind of faded out, and she was like, okay, I'm done with that, moving on to another part of my identity or interest, or that kind of thing. So
I'm a big fan of believer. I really believe strongly in projects, and that was one of the things with Reggio too, is that was really the first time that I really understood the value of observation. Like
mm.
really, and that's sometimes really hard for a teacher to stop talking and stop planning and sit back and watch. And then, you always got a clue. If you watched well enough and long enough and didn't interfere, you would see something. And then, so with the project approach too. It's kind of then if you created the environment, if you put the materials out and see what happens, like that was yeah, anyway, that's those are all things that I can relate really well to. I wonder though, so because you were in education for 11 years before you left, is that right?
That is correct. Sorry, I lost you. Like your screen disappeared for a sec. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, I was in education for 11 years before I had children. I was in education for a total of about 17 years.
Okay. So
Mhm.
that's like I had like my the total was probably 45 years that I was in education. And I remember when our son was about 8, I really was considering alternative education, like putting him into like I didn't it wasn't something that was on my table that I thought that I could just do it all myself. And he was an only child and all this other stuff. But I was getting so frustrated with the system I was working in that I really researched it. I did all the groundwork for it and I felt really good. And I could not find the courage to pull him out. It was like, what if I screw this up? What if I am ruining his chances for like now I think I would do something different because I have a little bit better of an understanding that the future for kids growing up today is very different than the future that was open to me when I was growing up. And you needed that university education. You know, would probably have a few jobs, but not like today. Um, like our son does remote work, so he can travel the world, still have a good job. He can get his work done in, a lot less time than a school day for me was. And so the world is different. And there are so many examples of people that haven't gone through the normal system that, are excelling in life. So the point of this is maybe the circumstances were a little bit different, but what was it that gave you the confidence and courage to say, nope, not going to do this anymore. My kids are coming with me and I know better.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I recognize the brokenness of the public school system when I was young, and when I had this calling to be a teacher when I was 14, honestly, and that calling came around my recognition of the fact that the system was broken at that age. But I had some inspirational teachers that were clearly doing their best within the system and really inspiring and touching the lives of their students, and that was kind of my inspiration to do the same. So I entered the system knowing it was not in good shape and hoping that I could be a source for positive change.
Mhm.
And so then I taught for a long time, and the longer you're in it, the more you just become part of it, or at least that was my experience. The longer I was in it, the more I found myself becoming part of it. But I still didn't really recognize that. And then my oldest, excuse me, were very fortunate to have grandparents nearby, and so we didn't really do any kind of daycare or preschool with our kids because grandparents took care of them, and that was amazing. And then my youngest did attend pre-K, half day pre-K. It was at a school where my husband worked, where we knew the pre-K teacher. It was half day. We thought, okay, this is a good intro to school because my husband's a teacher too. And we just figured our kids would go to public school. There was not really, even though my sister was homeschooling and unschooling her kids, it was like, okay, we're still going to do this. Um, and school just was never a great fit for her. And we did school. I mean, she did school for until the end of third grade. So she did the pre-K, and then she did 2 years at a charter school, which was an okay charter school, but we didn't love it. And then she transferred to another school where her dad was working again. And that was going okay, but that was the year that the pandemic hit. And then she did online school for third grade. what I think happened was when I was doing that pod school, the year of the virtual school and the pandemic, was that I personally had time to reflect on my life and my choices and what I
Hmm.
was doing. I was technically outside of the public school system. I was being paid by a private organization, but I was supporting all these kids in the public school system. So I still kind of felt like I was part of it, but I had a lot more time on my hands. There were times of day when I only had 9 kids, one of them was my own. And there were times of day when all of them were on a virtual meeting and I was just hanging out, waiting for them to finish. And I didn't have lesson plans to do or papers to grade
Hmm.
because that wasn't part of my role. And so I would just kind of think about things. And when I took this position, my intention was I knew it was a 1 year position because it was a pandemic thing. But I was like, there's always a teacher shortage. I'll find another job, no problem, after this is all over. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought I did not want to go back. And the more I thought about that, the more I realized I didn't want my kid to go back either. So I'm not sure where my confidence came from to answer your question. I think I just knew that I didn't want to keep doing what we'd always been doing and that I really wanted something different for my kids and myself. Um,
Do you think that would have happened without the pandemic?
That's a great question, and it's one that I've asked myself, and it's really hard to know uh, what would have happened without the pandemic. Um, I like to think I would have eventually found our way out, but who knows?
Well, I know that a lot of thinking around education changed because there was more of an awareness of other ways to do things. And I think more of an awareness of parents of, how their children were learning as well. So I think some good things did come out of it.
Oh, sure.
Kristen, okay, two things, but first thing, what does a normal like a school day, what does it look like in your family? Like from the beginning of the day to the end of the day?
So our days are a little different. So we have like our at-home days and our at school days since we do have this unschooly space that we go to. Um, So our at-home days are really my kids are doing our at-home days are more me focused on um working on stuff for my business or taking care of my house and also taking care of my kids' needs, but we don't do any direct learning specifically. My youngest the last few days has been really into Lego. She's been building lots of stuff with Legos and that's been her thing. My oldest is a night owl right now. She stays up super late, so she sleeps a lot of the day, not most of the day, but a lot of the day. And she spends most of her time in her room. She spends a lot of time. She crochets quite a bit, and she sells some of her crochet pieces, which is pretty exciting. She spends a lot of time playing games and connecting with friends through her device too, which I think is really valid and important for her development. All of that social time with her friends. Um, and she also will sometimes go out for walks during the day on her own in our little neighborhood. So those are kind of our at-home days.
So does that
And then,
sound like sounds like a weekend day?
uh-huh, yeah, a
Okay.
lot of unschoolers. It's funny, some people will say that to people who are just getting started, like treat your time like you're on summer break or on a weekend and just kind of let your kids do their thing
Mm.
and things will come together for them.
And how many days
Yeah.
a week would that be in general?
So we're home, we're home one full day a week during the week. Like if you're breaking down the week to the weekdays, we are pretty much home during the weekends, or we go out and do like family stuff. Our weekends are very weekend like in
Mhm.
that like my husband's home from work, so we do kind of more family stuff. So Wednesday is our kind of day at home. And then Monday we're home for like the first part of the day, but then we have a couple of activities that we do in the afternoon. And then Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, we're at our school space. And since my kids are, even my little one stays up not nearly as late as her sister, but she does stay up a little late and sleeps kind of late in the mornings. So we have somebody else who opens up our school space because we don't like to go super early. So we have somebody else who starts at 9 and then we get there around 10. So I get my kids up around 8:30 and we get ready and out of the house around 9:30. And then at the school space, again, kids are free to do what they want. We have like craft supplies, we have games, we have toys, we have a small library, we have a pet lizard that they can visit with. They don't hold him, but they can visit with her. So lots of things, and then just friends, friends and other kids to interact with that they play games with and all kinds of things. And then during our school day too, we also have some clubs. So those are specific topics. So like on Tuesdays, we have a crochet club, a doll club, and an ASL club. On Thursdays, we have art club, clay club, and a yearbook club. We're actually doing a yearbook this year for the first time. On Fridays, we have a drama club and a stretch and balance club, and an automotive club. So, and different kids sign up for different clubs. So my kids participate in some of those things that I just listed out. And the ones they're not participating in, they're just doing other things. They're
So,
generally not on their devices much when we're at school.
so what, like, is that like like the school itself? Is it 9 to 3,
It
4?
runs, yeah, it runs 9 to 3, 3 days a week. But there's also, and then there's clubs that are within that time, and there's also a few evening clubs and a couple on Monday, which is a day we're not like there all day.
And how many children would be involved in the school?
So we have two different programs. We have our drop-off program that runs like the full day, and we have 14 kids in that program, or 12 right now. And then our clubs program is much larger, and we have around 45 or 50 kids in the clubs program. And like I said, they don't all go to all clubs. They sign up for the clubs that they want to do. And a lot of the parents are also volunteers who run the clubs.
So it sounds like it's the real kind of extracurricular activities of a system where the kids have more exposure to different kinds of clubs and activities and peers to play with and the that kind of an environment. Would that be right?
Yes. Yeah, you could call it extracurricular, but yeah, since we're not too worried about the curricular part, we believe that, following these passions will bring them where they need to go.
So where does okay, so now I've got an idea a bit of how the days go in a week. Where does something that looks like that a person could look at and say, oh, um, they're not they're learning something because they're always learning something, but oh, they're like, is everything included in real life? Like anything connected with reading or math or science or is that naturally included or do you do some targeted, like when a child wants to read and like, do you sit down and help them decode and figure things out or is there anything that looks like academic learning?
Um, there can be if that's what kids are interested in. So yes, absolutely. If a kid's asking for help with reading, we will help them decode. We will help them remember the sounds. We'll help them write out words when they want to make cards or notes for people. Um, Yes. And when we want to make recipes, we talk about measuring. Like we do, we've done some cooking, but we've also done sciencey recipes like making slime or doing elephant toothpaste and stuff like that, which is always fun for kids to do. Um, so within the unschooling approach, the idea is that reading and math are tools. They're tools that we use in our life. I wouldn't say that reading and math are real life. I would say that they're tools that we use in real life, if
Mhm.
that
Yep.
distinction is okay. And because we adults are using these tools all the time, the kids around us also want to use these tools, and they tend to be okay with where they are in their learning of the tools. So they'll say things like, I hear kids often, in public school, you'll hear a kid talk about where they are with their reading, but if they're not where they're supposed to be, they'll have some shame and some
Yeah.
disappointment in that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when you're with homeschool kids and unschool kids, you'll commonly hear them say, well, I can't read yet, with zero shame or disappointment in
Mm.
themselves. They just know, so kids learn to read in so many different ways, and it's so fun to watch the different ways that kids learn to read. The average age for kids learning to read amongst unschoolers and homeschoolers is wide. It's between 4 and 11.
Mhm.
So it's a really wide range. But for most people who allow their kids to learn when they're ready, they say one day it just clicks and they just have it, and then they're readers, you know.
Yeah.
I go back to my oldest a little bit, and I think that even though she learned to read in school, I think she was forced a little too early, and that it it had a huge impact on her relationship with the idea of reading. She can read. She's read some books for pleasure, but not very many at all. But she can read when she needs to. So yeah,
Yeah, I've seen that in international schools a couple of times when a child would come in from a country that started, usually from one of the Nordic countries, and started education later. And they would come in, at a grade two level or something and not have started to read yet. And within months, they were on grade level because they were ready, like timing was right, they were motivated, they wanted to. So it's kind of like they didn't have to go through the torture of being
that's
expected
not.
to do that before they were ready to. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
the
get
torture
that.
part is so not necessary. And the same thing happens with math. We talk about numbers all the time. You know, my little one will say things like, "Oh, we're going to play 3 rounds of this game and we played two, so there's one left." Like that's her working out how numbers work, right? And there's lots of stories of unschooled kids who decide they want to go to college or pursue a degree in something, and when they're 15 or 16 years old, they sit down and do all the necessary
Yeah.
math they need to get into college in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
And they, because they're ready and their brains are ready to grab it, and and they're motivated because they have this thing they want to do. So, and unschooled kids absolutely do and can go to college and university. So that's a another worry that a lot of people have, but it happens.
What do you see your role in as being the unschooling or the radical unschooling parent? What's your role? Like what responsibility do you take on yourself?
Yeah. So the role of the unschooling parent, and for me personally, is really about supporting our kids in their journeys and helping them figure out what it is they want and how they can pursue it. And this looks different again for every family. Some families have more resources that they can pour into things. They can buy their kids lots of
Mhm.
things to explore or they can send them to lots of classes or find different experiences. Others have to be a little bit more creative with it, but they figure it out. Um, so yeah, it's really about supporting and encouraging and just helping your kids find their passions and explore them.
Yeah.
So, I know one unschool parent who says that she used to really push and pull her kids to go out and do things or to do classes that they might be interested in. She would work the, "Hey, are you interested in this?" And they would say, "Yeah, sign me up." But then she'd be the one telling them, "Oh, we need to go. We need to get out of the house to go do this thing." And sometimes they were kind of dragging their feet. And she just said, "You know what? I will still support you to do classes, but you have to be the one dragging me out of the house." And now her kids only do things that they are super fired up and passionate about, and that works for that family. Other families push and pull a little more. It's different for everyone. Um,
I imagine for each child it would be different too, like what you need to do
that too.
to support them.
Yeah, that too. And I've come across some other families where we've talked about, some kids, and this is back to like sort of that innate personality trait. Some kids are excited about everything you put in front of them. They're excited, you offer them anything and they're like, "Okay, sure, I'll do that." And other kids are down about everything. Like, "I don't want to do anything." And those parents will still push and pull. Um, but they all work out what works for their family and their kids.
What would you say is the biggest, or what are the biggest misconceptions that somebody has about how you are raising your children?
There's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of people who, like I said, who view it as lazy parenting or unparenting, who think that we might be setting our kids up for failure, really. And it's hard to know what to say to those people, and context matters a lot. I'm always happy to talk to people if they're willing to listen. If they just want to judge and throw up their hands and say I'm a terrible parent and walk away, then I let them do that. That's their choice to have that thought and to judge me that way. If they want to have a real conversation about it, I talk about how I think that the connection and building an emotionally strong and stable kids is actually more important to me than academics.
Yeah.
I can talk about uh, just the fact that freedom is important. And I think it's really important that we give our kids the freedom. I think it's important to let them experience freedom. I think too many people grow up into being adults who don't know what to do with themselves and don't know how to process what they're feeling, and they spend all their time doing things because it's what society told them to do and not what they truly wanted to do. So it's
How
important for me.
how do you I agree with what you're saying.
Mhm.
And and my biggest worry about the this generation coming up is that they won't be able to tap into themselves as much because there's such a reliance on social media and that kind of influence. How are you how do you balance some of that? Like if you're not restricting, then like what do you think about that?
So it's really about teaching proper use. Like, and this is not what you're talking about, but I'm going to use this as an example. You know, if a kid picked up a box of matches and was like playing with them, is it, what do you think is more effective? Do you think teaching the child about fire safety and how to safely use the matches and what could happen, in the event of not using them safely, is that going to help the child better in the long run? Or is telling the child they can't play with matches ever again and taking them away from them, is that going to help them better in the long run? And so for me, it's really about teaching safe use of things. And, like for my child who's on, for my older child who is on tech quite a bit, we've talked a lot about internet safety, a lot about information that she should never give away to anybody she doesn't know. And that kind of thing. And so, and she's confident in her use of the internet. And we talk a lot about what is and isn't okay. I also talk with her a lot about trusting what she feels in her body when she has an experience and when to get away from something.
Mhm.
And not just her, but other kids I know who have similar relationships with technology. They're really great at spotting any kind of person that doesn't belong in a kid's space and getting away from them in even in that internet space. And so that's just an example, but I think teaching our kids about how to interact with the world is just really important.
So again, like almost every time it really boils down to the relationship you have with your child and your communication with them.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So
building just like so much trust.
yeah.
Making sure that they know you're trusted and that they can trust the adults in their lives.
What would you say is your biggest, or maybe you'll go back to the first example. What is your biggest parenting challenge? Is it the sibling duo?
Well, no. I think honestly, my biggest parenting challenge, and you mentioned deschooling earlier, and we didn't really get around to it. And I think we're probably getting close to the end of our time together. But deschooling, I'll just talk about that really quickly. Some homeschool people use the term deschooling to refer to like a short period of time after you leave school. And it's kind of like this idea of detoxing school, like
Mhm.
letting all of the trauma or whatever happen from school and just having time where you're not really doing much. But I look at deschooling as something fairly different. And so do a lot of unschooling people, where it's this like inner work that we do where we're constantly questioning like all of the societal conditioning we've undergone and questioning our own responses to things. So I think for me, and this is just something I'm constantly working on, is the biggest challenge for me in parenting is becoming aware of my responses, questioning why I'm responding that way, and then trying to decide how I want to respond, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
very much.
So, it's that knee-jerk reaction to saying, no, you can't have more sugar today. To going, well, is a little more sugar really going to be the end of this? Is it, and do I want to have a power struggle over this thing right now?
Mhm.
So it's really about just questioning my own responses and trying
Yeah,
to maintain my own inner peace and calm to respond to my kids in the healthiest way possible.
that's beautiful. I often say to parents that are struggling, rule of thumb, always put the relationship first. And usually that comes from being very reflective of yourself. So that really makes sense. And maybe that kind of a challenge is something that we all have all of our lives. Okay, I do have two last questions before we wrap up. And the first one is just for fun. So, what would be the title of a movie for your family life up till this present time? And then what would be a short synopsis or summary?
Oh my gosh. A title of a movie and a short synopsis or summary. Wow. Um, wow, that is hard. Let's call it, I'll go a little silly. Let's call it The Evolution of Mom. And and I do really think and maybe it sounds selfish, I don't know, but it's about me, and it's about the changes that I underwent in becoming a parent, which oddly enough I didn't think about. I didn't think about how becoming a parent would change me. I joke sometimes that I was the best parent before I had kids. Like I had all these
Yeah,
opinions about how I would
yeah,
parent, and then they all went out the window once I had children. So it's really about, for me, how much I've changed and grown and come into the parent that I am right now, and that, I know I'll continue to evolve into. So synopsis would probably just be seeing me go from this like arrogant pre-parent person of like, I'm going to do this better than everybody else has.
hmm
So silly. And then trying some authoritative stuff on, or some, where I try the timeouts and the yelling and stuff like that. And then getting to this place of where I'm more focused on relationship and connection and my own inner calm.
very nice.
Yeah.
Okay, the
Thanks.
final question to wrap it up. I want you to imagine one of your children at a point in their life when they are starting their own family. You're going to become a grandmother for the first time. What words of wisdom are you going to share with that daughter?
Wow. I can't even imagine my children having children, but definitely a possibility. So first of all, I will share that I have two journals for my children where I write to them in them, with no
Beautiful.
intention of them getting them anytime soon. It's kind of like where I kind of write about experiences we have and more what I learned from those experiences. So I'd love to be able to give them those,
That's
some
lovely.
at some point in their future, whether they're having children or not. But I think my most important thing to tell them would be to trust themselves and trust their children, and focus on that relationship always,
Yeah, very nice.
to
I I love
turn
what you
down all the
just
noise.
yes. I love what you said that you're doing. And that like I wish I had done that. I tried initially doing it as videoed letters, and it got lost in the, in life. And then, but what I did after I retired was I wrote a book for him, for our son, with all the things that I hope he remembers when he is becoming a parent. And he would say, oh, well, what would mom think about this? Or what would mom do? Or what would mom say? And I'm not here. So then he would have it all there. I think those gifts that we give our children, where we let them really understand our heart and our mind, um, I think I think it's beautiful. So your girls they will really benefit from that. All right. Well, listen, thank you very much for all of your information. Like I really learned quite a lot about this, and I'm sure that people listening to this will get some really good information and insight about it. So thank you very much for your time.
Absolutely. It was so much fun talking about.
If you're a parent raising a boy in today's complex world, be sure to explore sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll discover expert guidance and support designed to help you unlock your full parenting potential. As Amelia Gambetti says, this job is too difficult and too beautiful to do alone. Together we can explore this adventure and discover the magic of raising boys.